On one winter day, James Earl Jones experienced something that shook the very core of his being. On his grandparents' farm in Mississippi, the 12-year-old James Earl watched as life gradually slipped away from his uncle's body. What was even more traumatizing about this event was the fact that he was the only one that was in a position to save his uncle. With a heart gripped by fear and his body quaking uncontrollably, he dashed to a nearby store in search of help. Yet, as he reached the store, fear paralyzed him completely, rendering him unable to move or utter a word. In that agonizing moment, he knew his uncle's fate hung in the balance and he couldn't afford to falter again. What happened that day broke young James Earl and formed the foundation of the person he became. From the darkness of that ordeal emerged a resolve, a commitment to self-improvement, to never again find himself in such a state of helplessness. This incident and so many more events shaped the man that he became. Here is what they don't tell you about the iconic James Earl Jones. A love-hate relationship with his voice. If you have a physical feature or a unique ability that has opened doors for you and made you stand out in your industry, you would love this feature or ability, right? Well, let's just say James Earl doesn't feel the same way about his voice. There is no denying that James Earl is a phenomenal and seasoned actor who has proven himself over the years, but if there is one thing that truly sets him apart, it's his voice. James Earl Jones possesses one of the most distinctive and powerful voices in the world of entertainment. What makes his voice so unique is its deep, resonant tone, commanding presence, and unparalleled richness. His voice is imbued with a unique blend of authority, gravitas, and warmth, which captivates audiences and commands attention. It's like his voice has its own authority and confidence, making people feel captivated whenever they hear him speak. Throughout his career, Jones has utilized his remarkable voice to bring a wide array of characters to life, leaving an unforgettable mark on each role he takes on. Some of the roles that have showcased his voice include his role as Darth Vader in Star Wars.
No, I am your father.
You know that scary villain in the Star Wars movies who breathes heavily and talks with a deep voice? That's Darth Vader, and James Earl Jones provided his voice. You would agree that his voice made Darth Vader sound even scarier and more powerful. Secondly, his role as Mufasa in The Lion King.
Take Nala home. I've got to teach my son a lesson.
Remember the wise and kind Lion King from The Lion King?
Simba, I'm very disappointed in you.
I know.
You could have been killed.
That's Mufasa, and James Earl Jones gave him his voice. His deep, majestic voice made Mufasa sound like a true leader, someone you could look up to. Because of James Earl's voice, Mufasa's words echoed in the hearts and minds of viewers and made them even more attached to the character. For someone whose voice is one of his greatest assets, one would think that he loves his voice, but this is far from the truth. It will amaze you to know that this same voice that his fans are obsessed with, James Earl doesn't think it's anything special. It's safe to say that James Earl dislikes his own voice, and here is why. In an interview, he spoke about how he truly feels about this iconic voice that has opened a lot of doors for him in the industry. In his words, "I have no presumptions and no arrogance about my voice. You might think I might be in love with my voice, I'm not. It would be the most unfaithful lover I've ever had because it fails me often. I can't string ideas and words together that well." James Earl is one of the actors in Hollywood who discovered what his uniqueness was and didn't hold back on showcasing this unique trait to the world. His voice has sent chills down the spines of viewers and has captivated the attention of thousands of people all over the world. But James Earl has made it clear that he doesn't think his voice is all that. Why? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to his early years. Very few people know this about the actor, but when he was younger, he had a crippling stutter. It was so bad that when his friends were boldly speaking in a gathering or sharing their opinions, James would keep shut as he was afraid of embarrassing himself. He would reveal in a later interview that his stutter was so bad when he was around 8 years old that he barely had the confidence to say anything at all. He often kept to himself and shied away from any situation that required him to speak up. In his words, "I was a stutterer. I couldn't talk. So my first year of school was my first mute year, and then those mute years continued until I got to high school. As he got older, he developed health conditions that made it even more difficult for him to speak clearly. This only made him feel worse. He suffered from sinusitis for the most part of his life and had to use inhalers and nasal sprays frequently to be able to breathe properly. He has revealed that his love for poetry and acting was what really helped him overcome his stutter. This journey of struggling to speak and having to develop his self-confidence was not an easy one, but he eventually got a hang of it and began to use his voice in the industry. Perhaps his lifelong struggles with speaking is what makes him have this bitter-sweet relationship with his voice. His voice has been his greatest blessing, yet his greatest curse all at the same time, but this is the part of his life that people don't know about. People who have seen him in movies are usually drawn by his voice, not knowing that just like most people, he struggled to refine his skills, and sharing his gifts with the world requires him to wake up every day and constantly fight his limitations and fears. But this is not the only aspect of his life that people don't know about. Abandoned by his father. Although the media has focused on James Earl's accomplishments over the years, not many people talk about the early experiences that shaped his life as we know it. A chapter of his story that very few people know is the part where he was abandoned by his own father. Born in Arkabutla, Mississippi in the early 1930s, James's childhood was not a normal and peaceful childhood with two present parents. Sadly, shortly after he was born, his father packed his bags and left James and his mother. James's mother, Ruth, who was a teacher and a maid, struggled to take care of her child and to make ends meet, but no matter how hard she tried, the absence of his father left a void that could not be filled. One can only imagine how James felt when he grew up and found out that his father abandoned him. The pain and rejection he felt could not be hidden. James had to learn to live without a father figure and to accept the sad reality that he may never know his father. Each year that passed by, his mother struggled more and more to take care of him. Soon she realized that she couldn't do it by herself, so she decided to ask her parents for help. When James was 5 years old, his mother would leave him with his maternal grandparents John Henry and Maggie Connolly in Mississippi. They later relocated to Michigan, and James Earl would later reveal that relocating to go and stay with his grandparents was a traumatic experience for him. Although his grandmother loved him very much, he faced some issues that affected him greatly. This was the period that he developed a stutter and became reserved. While he was being raised by his grandparents, his father was living a totally different life. It was later revealed that when his father left, he went to Memphis where he worked on the railroad, after which he worked as a boxer. He would later relocate to New York where he got a job with Works Progress Administration. While he was moving from one city to another and working different jobs, he hardly reached out to James and his mother. Their relationship remained estranged until the 1950s when their paths crossed in New York. When James decided to move to New York to pursue an acting career, meeting his father became inevitable. They ended up meeting in New York and attempting to reconcile, but the time they had spent apart made it difficult for their relationship to heal. In James's words, "It was too late to get to know him as a father. If you don't learn that from the beginning, there's no way to catch up. It took us a while to accept we could be friends." It was impossible for James to heal completely and forget what his father had done, but he tried to open his heart and to give his father a chance to make things right. As time went by, they grew a bit closer. His father became one of the people who gave him good career advice. His father told him that acting is a profession someone should only get into because they love it. This advice certainly kept him going in the tight times. Although the past was never forgotten, James and his father reconciled. The color of his skin was a factor. Over the years, it has been clear that James Earl Dean earned every single role he has ever portrayed because of his unique acting skills. However, there was a time in his life when he got a major role partly because of the color of his skin. Interestingly, this turned out to be his breakout role. The producer wanted the film to represent multiple ethnicities, so he chose James intentionally. James's career began after his love for poetry and acting evolved into something more serious. After serving in the United States Army, James found himself gravitating towards acting as a career. His career would begin on Broadway in the 1950s, and with each performance, the actor fell deeper in love with acting. He performed several Shakespeare's plays, including Hamlet and King Lear. His theater work was said to be impeccable, and it was very clear that he was an exceptional actor. His skills led to him winning awards, and before he knew it, A major career opportunity came his way, and what was a major disadvantage for a lot of actors became his advantage. In the early 1960s, the then famous filmmaker Stanley Kubrick had attended a performance of Shakespeare in the Park because he had his eye on a particular actor, George C. Scott, who he wanted to work with. However, as he watched the performance, another actor began to catch his attention. Scott was said to have been playing Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, as Jones was playing the Prince of Morocco, as it wasn't long before Kubrick realized that he wanted to work with James Earl Jones as well. James would reveal in a later interview that the filmmaker allegedly made it seem like he was picking him because of his skin color. James, recalling the experience, said Kubrick said something in the line of, "I'll take the black one too." While James was not exactly thrilled about how or why the filmmaker expressed his interest, James was more focused on growing his career. This meeting, although awkward and cringy, would birth the beginning of James's film career. The traumatic experience that changed his life. Have you ever experienced something that changed your entire perspective about life? Maybe someone you love passed away, or you witnessed something tragic that left you traumatized. When James Earl was in his formative years, he experienced a deeply traumatic incident that left an indelible mark on his psyche. At the tender age of 12, while living on his grandparents' farm in Mississippi, he witnessed something that scarred him for life. It happened on one winter day as everyone else was going about their daily activities. Young James Earl soon found himself watching his uncle slipping into the cold hands of death. James Earl witnessed his uncle suffer a seizure, and he was the only one that was in a position to help his uncle. This harrowing event plunged him into a state of shock and fear, as he had never encountered such a distressing situation before. Recalling the incident, Jones vividly remembered the sense of helplessness that engulfed him as his uncle's life hung in the balance. In a desperate bid to seek assistance, he embarked on a frantic journey to find help, racing to a nearby store with a phone. However, his attempts to communicate were thwarted by his debilitating stutter, rendering him incapable of articulating the urgency of the situation. In his words, "I'd never seen anything like it, and it terrified me. I finally got to a store that had a phone, but I couldn't speak. All I could do was stutter. My uncle's life was in my hands, and I couldn't speak. That was the beginning." This traumatic experience left an indelible imprint on Jones, instilling in him a profound sense of vulnerability and inadequacy. The realization that he was unable to verbalize his distress in a moment of crisis fueled his already existing struggles with self-esteem and confidence, exacerbating the profound impact of his stutter. Despite the profound trauma he endured, this experience formed the foundation for Jones's resilience and determination. Instead of giving up, James decided to work hard to get better at talking. He practiced a lot and didn't let his stutter stop him from doing what he wanted. Eventually, he became an actor, where he could talk in front of lots of people without any problems. Even though it was tough, James learned that bad things can happen, but we can still find ways to get through them. This experience taught him that even when things seem impossible, we can still find ways to succeed if we keep trying. Ultimately, this transformative event not only shaped Jones's personal journey, but also fundamentally altered his perspective on life. It taught him the invaluable lesson of resilience in the face of adversity and imbued him with a profound appreciation for the power of communication. His unforgettable military service. Like many young men in his time, James enrolled in the Army to serve his country, but this decision left him with a lifetime of complicated feelings and views. James Earl's journey through the military was a complex mix of duty, identity, and conflicting emotions. Like many young men of his generation, he found himself thrust into the world of military service during a time of global conflict. The Korean War loomed large on the horizon, and James Earl awaited his orders with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. It's important to understand that James Earl's experience in the military wasn't just about fighting on the battlefield. Before he received his commission as a second lieutenant, he found himself immersed in the world of theater, working on stage crews, and even acting at the Ramsdell Theater in Manistee, Michigan. This early exposure to the arts would later influence his career as an actor, but at the time, it provided a stark contrast to the impending realities of war. When James Earl was commissioned in 1953, the Korean War had just ended. While this meant he wouldn't be immediately thrown into the fray, it didn't diminish the weight of his new responsibilities. Reporting to Fort Moore for the infantry officer's basic course, he began his formal training, preparing for a future that was uncertain yet inevitable. In a reflective piece for the Wall Street Journal, James Earl revealed his conflicted feelings about his military service. While he believed that certain wars like World War II were justified and necessary, he couldn't muster the same enthusiasm for the Vietnam War. This distinction speaks volumes about his evolving perspective on conflict and the role of the military in society. In his words, "I believe some wars, like World War II, are justified and necessary, but I was not in favor of fighting in Vietnam." James Earl's time in the military was also colored by his experiences with racism and prejudice. Serving in the first fully integrated officers' corps in U.S. military history during the Korean War, he encountered both acceptance and resistance. Despite the progress towards integration, there were still individuals who couldn't bring themselves to fully accept him as an equal. He said there were fellow officers who couldn't even bring themselves to shake his hand. The combination of his military service and his encounters with discrimination left James Earl with a sense of ambivalence towards his own identity as a soldier. He explained, saying, "I was no patriot, but I was a citizen, and I planned to wear my uniform and do my duty as a soldier." While he may not have considered himself a fervent patriot, he understood the importance of fulfilling his duty as a citizen. Truth is, James Earl's military experience was a formative chapter in his life, shaping his worldview and influencing his future endeavors. While he may have had mixed feelings about his time in the military, it undoubtedly influenced the man he became. Why he was silent during the Civil Rights Movement. James Earl Jones is one of the black actors who has paved the way for African American actors to have equal opportunities, but there was a time in his life when he didn't publicly support the Civil Rights Movement. It was in the 1960s, and his career had just taken off. People expected him to use his influence to become a spokesman for civil rights, but he refused to. It looked like he was intentionally choosing to be neutral in order to protect his career. But several years later, he explained his reason for staying silent at the time. There is no denying that there was a massive social upheaval in the United States in the 1960s. People were tired of the racial segregation and discrimination, and they began to speak up in order for equal rights for African Americans. To support the movement, several influential African Americans lent their voice and influence to the movement, showing their support and fighting for the change that they desperately wanted. During this period, James Earl's career was picking up, and as one of the rising black actors, people expected him to speak up, but he remained silent. In a 2013 interview with the Toronto Star, James Earl finally addressed the issue as he claimed that people always ask him why he didn't lend his voice to the movement. The actor expressed that he does not regret his actions, and if he could go back in time, he will make the same decisions that his younger self made. In his words, "I'm sure a lot of black people thought I was shirking my responsibility, but I look at it this way. Anybody can carry a picket sign, but I think you should be able to articulate what that sign means. At the height of the civil rights crisis in America, a lot of us weren't sure what was really going on. That's why I wasn't a spokesperson." Aside from the fact that the actor didn't want to carry a picket sign because he didn't fully understand what was going on, he also knew that he wasn't going to be able to articulate what he was protesting for. He then decided to use the characters to address issues that he couldn't speak about. So instead of protesting on the streets, he was strategic about choosing movie characters that reflected his personal beliefs about African Americans and the movement. Bringing these characters to life was his way of speaking up and fighting for what he believed in. So he may not have held a picket sign and protested in the streets, but he believed that he was effecting change through his roles. Through all of life's ups and downs, James Earl found a way to strategically navigate his career and become one of the most successful actors in his time. Although he has been pretty open about all that he went through on his journey to the top, he has made it clear that his journey wasn't without its challenges.